Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our fourth virtual breakfast. My name is Ben Kent. I'm a director here at Meridian West. And today we're going to be looking at how do you do thought leadership campaigns post-coronavirus. There's been masses of communication about coronavirus from all the professional services firms, but I think we may be reaching a point where people are kind of saturated with that, and it's increasingly difficult to get cut through. So we're going to be debating, what are the new topics that are going to be quite exciting as the kind of world changes? And there's plenty of opportunity there because I think the world, a lot of macro trends are going to be accelerating. And also, are there different ways of doing thought leadership that are kind of more agile? So we're going to be running till 9:30, the formal presentation, and then after 9:30 there's a Q&A session. So we're going to do that using the audio. So I think everyone's on mute at the moment, but if you do want to ask a question at the end, just unmute yourself. There'll also be a recording of this, which we're going to put onto YouTube either later on today or tomorrow. So before we sort of dive in, let's ask people to introduce themselves. Suzanne, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Good morning, Suzanne, Snowden, Message Consulting. I've been in marketing, business development, professional services for a good, I don't want to say how many years, but it's nearly 30, I expect. A lot of that in thought leadership. And these are certainly times I have never seen before. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion around how we cope.
Thank you, Suzanne. Matt?
Hello, I'm Matt from Coast Communications. We're a public relations and communications consultancy. We've been working with Ben for a number of years and been working with professional firms for over 25 years. And we help firms with their media relations and comms strategies, but also developing, along with Ben and the team at Meridian West, ideas for thought leadership and helping turn those thought leadership into engaging content.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. And Amir?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amir. I am head of marketing for CBS, which is Customer and Breach Support at Deloitte. Been in professional services for around 20 years. Worked across the Big Four and mid-tier, and like Suzanne said, really challenging times, and we're hoping for a really good debate this morning.
And also joined by my colleague Alice Francis. So just introduction, many of you will know Meridian West, but we run thought leadership campaigns, both coming up with the ideas, doing the research, and also helping copyright reports and increasingly digital assets as well. So what I thought would be we did a bit of research, kind of gives us some thoughts of some of the sort of topics and how those are trends. So what I'm going to do now is just share with you a few slides. So the first issue we were looking at is what are the topics that are going to be relevant to business? And it feels like there's going to be different phases to this crisis. The immediate response, where GDP kind of is plummeting, this is probably where we are right now. The recovery, which may be long or sharp, and then the sort of transformation. And it feels like different topics are going to be relevant at different points. So at the moment, it's very much about cash flow, refinancing, government support. Are there any regulatory exemptions? A lot of focus on cyber, as I think you'd agree, Amir, and supply chain management. I think those trends are going to shift as we get into the recovery mode. So I think still kind of crisis, distress type topics, but potentially we're going to see PE funds and others acquiring businesses. They still have big cash balances, the emergence of more disputes, and then restructuring and divestment. But I think what's interesting about this crisis is it's likely to result in transformation and really accelerate some of the trends that we've seen coming out to, over the course of the last 10 years. And I think really quite a new society and economy. Potentially it's going to accelerate the kind of end of globalization, already started with Trump. What's the customer of the future look like? What's the future of work? How are people going to work? What's the future of real estate? The acceleration of digital transformation, and also purpose and trust. I think people are very conscious of going beyond just shareholder returns. So I think it's actually quite a good time to be doing thought leadership because there's some really kind of meaty topics there. We also did a poll of those people who are attending these webinars. So we're really lucky, the webinars have been very popular. We've got over 300 people signed up. And we asked them, which sectors do you think are going to be most severely by COVID? And we asked them to rank from 1 to 3. Now, I think everyone agrees that kind of retail up here is going to be severely impacted, then construction, transport. Financial services may come through this relatively unscathed. Oil and gas, we're already seeing suffering. And so a bit of good news here. Compared to other sectors, business and professional services look like they're going to be relatively unscathed. And there's some kind of hot spots like pharma and TMT. So arguably doing thought leadership around those areas could be much more around kind of opportunity. Up here, it's much more around crisis. But I think just taking a simplistic sector view is not to really understand what might be relevant to the clients. So I think there's a different way of segmenting your clients, which will really determine what they're interested in. So to what extent are they exposed to footfall? So within retail, many retailers aren't exposed particularly to footfall, so they're in a better place. How much cash have they got on their balance sheet, and how strong is their financing arrangement? And then you've got mindset of the people running the business. Are they entrepreneurial and opportunists? And you could almost segment your clients on these, and that will then determine what they're interested in. Alice, do you want to talk to this slide?
Thanks. Yeah, I think everyone here there's been a shift in the way that content's being delivered at the moment and the way that content's being received. And we're finding that this is also true in thought leadership. So where you previously had a year-long long-form report, we're actually seeing it much more regular, really interactive sort of content, often that's supported by audio or visual. But it's really important to remember that thought leadership can't just be the vanity project anymore, and actually that it needs to have a really strong commercial rationale. Budgets are going to come under a lot of scrutiny going forward and at the moment, and so you need to demonstrate that the expertise that you're talking about really does translate into solving clients' real-world problems. So thinking about the next few months, is your thought leadership really targeted? Does it reflect people's change in priorities, their change in demand for your services? And is it in a form where people actually want to consume it? Thanks.
Thank you, Alice. So let's go over to our panelists. Amir, you've been working at Deloitte, you've been in the thick of doing thought leadership. You know, what's the approach you've been taking, and what's the best way of communicating to clients in this environment?
Ben, so I think when it comes to best practice and sort of client communications and thought leadership right now, and it's probably going to come as no surprise to anyone, the priority and focus should be on what's important and relevant to your clients. And it's my view that right now teams need to be really careful with things that are off message and don't reflect the current context, or at least acknowledge the recovery phase is going to be somewhat long, it's going to be protracted, it's going to be potentially very painful, although we must remain optimistic. And that the content strategy, is going to require a major reset in terms of, certainly the coming months, to identify the right topics for your clients, and also, as Alice said, how do you then take those insights into the market in the right way? I'm sure many of you are battling with some of those challenges right now. And as we move in, sort of out of lockdown in the coming weeks, and we start to think about recovery, I think, many of the perennial thought leadership topics will remain on the agenda, but the tone and the positioning will fundamentally shift. In the last few weeks, I've certainly seen a shift from long form content to short form content, such as shorter blogs, social media, point of view pieces, short video explainers, and they're not perfect pieces. They're not the sort of glossy, thought leadership. They're sort of rough around the edges. And I've also seen a shift in the long drawn out surveys, as Alice said, into much more snappier sentiment surveys, which can be reported back in a matter of days. And that at the moment sentiment seems to be shifting daily. So it's all about contribution, not conversation. I think everyone's motive is not about getting new business. Businesses are just trying to stay afloat. So it's about thinking about how your organisation can make a contribution to the COVID-19 response, as opposed to trying to sort of lead the conversation. And there's also a massive sense of urgency, to create fresh thinking and insights. What would often take us months to produce we're having to research, write content, and get that necessary approval, we usually within a day or two, so that sort of window
that's quite a change, isn't it?
Absolutely. And
do you think we'll go back to the old days? Once the crisis, do you think that kind of focus on agility, giving an opinion quickly, do you think that will stick?
I think there'll be certain, there'll be certain room for those reports and insights which do take a little bit longer to sort of create. But I certainly think that as a marketing team we've become a little bit more agile. I mean, one example that we when the government announced their daily briefings, what Deloitte did is that we kicked off a daily update to our clients, which is a summary of key insights, news and trends from across the UK and across the world really. And we positioned it as a subscriber-only platform whereby partners could send it on to their clients, and in turn, clients would then subscribe to it. And interestingly, we didn't push it out on social media; we just used word of mouth. And 7 weeks into that campaign, we've just got over 5,000 subscribers to that content.
Wow.
And what it's done, it's created a community of active subscribers who, in turn, we can segment and start to think about how do we deliver future insights around this topic and debate.
So they join the community, and then you can, once you've got that community, you can be really targeted with them.
Absolutely. So it's all about trying to think about the right things to say in the right time. There's certainly a huge appetite for content right now because it's such a new issue which no one's had to face. So anything that's that's interesting, thought through, and that can really help businesses. Certainly winning the day right now.
And Suzanne, what's your thoughts on that? Do you agree with Amir?
I really agree, actually. In fact, I spotted the Deloitte piece on Twitter.
Yeah.
I joined that unprompted. Didn't see, didn't have an email or anything. I'm not a Deloitte client, of course, and it's terrific content. It was sharply delivered. It was within the first week of the lockdown. It wasn't, there wasn't any kind of report that backed it up. It just came live in the feed. It was phrased correctly for the response. It's about response and next steps on COVID-19. And I listened to a couple of them, and they were really good, really good. And now, as that evolves, they'll be able to bring in other content, risk management, funding, different issues into that channel. It's really, really a good output. But
sorry, go on.
Well, I really like your change curve, that graph you showed, because I can see how we're all in kind of a change curve now, starting with that kind of initial shock, and then through, this is terrific. Moving through the kind of acceptance and into recovery. And I now see this as not so much as, okay, we parked some things. There'll be teams that have had to park their content and shelve some things that they were planning. And that took a little while to get over because you probably invested a lot in this. But now I think there's a great opportunity to look at the middle and the right-hand side of that graph. And what are the topics that will be fresh and new that you could quickly get something out to your audiences on that could be surprising and interesting and differentiating. And a couple teams are doing that already. There's a great piece that EY has put out and McKinsey has put out already on consumer sentiment, which I think are really interesting.
The consumer future.
What are consumers going to buy? What are consumers going to not buy? What are they doing now? Really interesting.
So it's not too early to start thinking about some of these big picture topics. And Amir and Matt, what's your view on the kind of big topics that we're going to be seeing emerging? Is it going to be the kind of acceleration of existing trends, or are we going to see some of the trends we saw before the crisis kind of go back into reverse?
So Matt, I'll go first. So I think, in terms of, I suppose, best practice topics that are going to see high demand, resilience, be it operational, financial, emerging risk, that's the big topic right now. And the likelihood is it's likely to be the big topic for the rest of the year and into the next. Supply chain management, it's on your curve. What this pandemic has taught us is that the global supply chain is quite vulnerable. So expect to see some really big topics around supply chain. digital, has, that agenda has not gone away. It's been around for the last decade. And what this pandemic has done is accelerated, digital transformation. And I think those companies that have invested in digital transformation are likely to perform better in the coming months. So we expect to see some strong insights around AI and automation as people start to maximize new ways of working. Leadership, I'm sure everybody on this call is going to have some sort of top 10 or key lessons learned for leaders. But again, leaders are looking for the acute impact of this pandemic, insights around well-being, mental health, personal resilience. And finally, I think innovation, as we sort of go into this downturn, which is likely to happen, businesses leaders are going to start to search for insights on how they can improve innovation and work through those challenges. So I think setting a team within your organization to look at those key issues, broad issues that are going to affect businesses, and talking about them in a way that can resonate will be key.
One of the things I've been pondering is, we were seeing that kind of prior to the crisis, there was a lot of interest in purpose, sustainability, the environment. Do you think that's going to go into reverse as corporates really focused on shoring up their balance sheet and getting back into profitability? What's your view on that?
I don't think that's an issue that will revert back. I think it will remain high on people's agendas, and I think perhaps largely driven by consumers and those that feel more passionately about companies behaving in the way that we all feel they should. I think there's some other issues as well that wouldn't surprise me that will crop up. I think the whole issue of taxation and global taxation is going to be quite a big issue going forward. Governments are going to have to recoup the revenues and the support that they've got. And I think the whole issue of people and organisations paying their fair share, I think we started to see that with governments starting to withhold aid for companies that have shifted operations offshore. I think also as well, at a sort of a more regional level and for smaller professional firms, I think there's going to be a huge wave of entrepreneurialism that will come out of this as well.
I agree with you. I kind of, just my friends, the people who run kind of small businesses, you can tell they spent this time dreaming up new business models and trialing new technology. I think that's quite an unexpected kind of side effect of all of this.
It is. I think necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? And I think the crisis will have made an awful lot of people stop and think what is important to them, and moving forward those ideas that are I think there's some real challenges though for professional firms. I think as we shift back to sort of some degree of normality, and it will be very, very different, I think there will be a temptation for many firms to slip back into the old ways of doing things. And I think those firms that do that are likely to find themselves on the back foot against those that are a little bit more forward-looking and focusing their comms and thought leadership strategies on what is really important to clients rather than what partners and fee earners think are important to clients.
But it sounds like we've all agreed there's lots of very interesting sort of topics, and there needs to be a shift in terms of the way that thought leadership is done. Suzanne, you ran when you were at PwC those great big kind of landmark kind of campaigns. If you were going to start again and kind of, if you were sitting down and building a campaign plan for 2021, what's best practice look like? You had a blank sheet of paper, what would you be doing?
Yeah, really tough question. I those
that's why I asked it.
Those kind of big journeys that took ages to field and ages to create the comms for, and then finally you launch them. It's going to be too slow. You've got to be way more agile. And I think Amir mentioned at the beginning of the call that the turnaround time that they're being required to get stuff out now is just so short. So I think they're much shorter and sharper, and poll-based things, and maybe back to actually lots of people are feeling even, and I love the point that Matt made about that kind of thinking about what our lives are really like or were like. What do we like at this current point in time that we want to retain? And I think there's lots of more connectivity in some ways with work colleagues than there was when you had to wait and, you know, fly to New York and see them. So there might be new ways of doing kind of focus groups and polling using technology.
So you different research techniques. They kind of online focus groups.
Oh yeah, why not? And I think kind of getting things out sharper, faster, shorter chunks of content is going to be key. And people don't, you know, also, you know, that life's too short, frankly. I shouldn't be saying it, but, you know, reading a long report now, we've been saying that for years, but, you know, who's going to have time to read a long report and to deliver it in a physical way? I mean, I work on a charity, and we're looking at, you know, what are we going to do with our annual review? Well, we're going to put it on. There's no point in having a physical document with thud value. Who's going to deliver it to who? Yes. And how are we going to make that physical impact now? So I think a lot of things are going to change, and it's definitely going to go towards the smarter, shorter, sharper, and tech-enabled.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with you about doing different ways of collecting insight as well. So, you know, we've been doing much research, kind of quarterly polls, a bit like, you know, we work with with the pulse type survey. That seems to work really well, and also supplementing those with in-depth interviews, but not just the kind of classic, but doing those as video interviews, and you can get some really nice kind of visual content. The other interesting thing, Amir, I want to come to you, is about kind of setting up the kind of community, because that's almost in the nirvana, isn't it? It's no longer this is just a thought leadership report, you launch it to the world, but the kind of creating that community. And I'd be interested in, you know, your experience of doing that. It's easily said, but difficult to do.
It is, and I think it really comes down to a number of things. It's, you know, firstly, it's around, you know, delivering the right content and, you know, resonating with your audience. And if you're just trying to, you know, be all things to all people, you know, you're never gonna, you know, win the day. So, you know, it's about delivering the right content, and it's very, you know, personalization. You know, one of the things that we've done at Deloitte is, you know, through the use of Salesforce, is to really understand, you know, the mechanics of how our data works and how we have conversations with our clients. You know, professional service firms are built on client relationships, and we need to reflect that through our marketing communication. So, you know, we've just taken a bit more of an effort to drive, you know, the go-to-market activity. You know, the thought leadership is still the same. You know, we're still providing, you know, some really good insight, you know, fresh thinking, fresh research, but it's really around the sort of tactics and how you deploy, you know, that content and make people feel like you're personalizing it for them. And, you know, what we've certainly seen in the last, you know, few weeks is, you know, events have gone down to zero. So we're not doing any physical events. But the, you know, virtual webinars, the social media platforms, the blogs, video production, you know, they've increased, you know, 110%. So, and it's allowed us to, you know, really, you know, measure, you know, the value in that engagement. You obviously, with digital, you can measure it, so that's a really good opportunity to really start to think about, you know, how you're connecting with your audience, and building a community is just a lot easier. You know, when you go out to essentially, you know, go back to selling, you know, a service or a solution, you know, people trust. You know, people think, well, there's some credibility that you built over the months and years, and, you know, they're more receptive to wanting to have a conversation, and moved, you know, through the sales cycle.
Any tips on running virtual events? You know, because obviously we're running a webinar now, and then what any tips from Meridian West on what we could be doing next?
I think it's, you know, it's a new one for us as well. So, you know, we've only started to, you know, put some short sort of events together. I mean, I know there's some really big conferences where, you know, they're putting these virtual events, and I think, you know, it's something which is going to be trial and error. I think, you know, it's about the industry sort of learning from each other. You know, I'm certainly signed up for a few of those, you know, coming up in sort of May and June. So it'd be interesting to see how they manage those, you know, chat rooms, how they manage those virtual boardrooms and so forth. So I certainly think it's going to be, you know, certainly like that for certainly this year. You know, I don't think
we're all learning, really.
I don't think there's going to be any physical events this year. So it's all about how can you scale up your organization to think about these virtual webinars and make them accessible to your audience.
The other thing which I've been sort of wondering is, it's about short, sharp content, keeping people's engagement online. It feels like really this, what sort of skills that are needed from people? Is it more of a kind of journalistic type skills? People who are used to, like the BBC journalists. Are those the sort of people we need?
It's really interesting. I think we've always said when working with lawyers and accountants is stop thinking like a lawyer and an accountant when writing. Think about who you're actually writing it for. And if you're writing content for, I don't know, head of online security or cyber risk, it's going to be a very different style and tone of language than if you're writing for an FD or the chief exec. And likewise, if you're writing content for a chief marketing officer, again, a very different style. And I think it's actually think about who you're writing it for and what it is you want to say before pen to paper. And sometimes that may involve asking an external writer to come and help you out. But I think there are some very talented writers within the professions, and those that should be encouraged or want to write should be encouraged to do so and help. I think in webinars, it is interesting. I think nobody really has training to sit in front of a camera unless you are a broadcast journalist. And I think if you are holding very large conferences or online events, having a moderator that is used to that format can make life very easy and can sort of be the glue that holds it together, because it is a very different skill set. And most professionals, it's not something most professionals normally have to contend with.
And Suzanne, can I come to you? Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. While Matt was speaking, it occurred to me that there are so many more people developing content now. My neighbor is a teacher. She's in content development now. She's asking me, how do I do this class in a little packet I can send via video. So the group of people on this call, we used to think of ourselves as leaders in content development, and I think we need to now be aware that there's a whole load of industries that are all now going to be piling in, who are going to be developing online video and online consumption, social media type content. And there's
maybe learning from you. I'm listening to what my kids' teachers are doing. How are they doing it? Because they're trying to engage 12-year-olds for the entire day. What could be more difficult?
Exactly, but the channels are going to be really that it's going to be very crowded. It's going to be hand above the, so how, I think the key question is, what do you do, how often, and how distinctive can you make it? Because just throwing stuff down the pipe, I think, is not going to be very effective.
We're coming up to 9:30, so I thought I'd kind of wrap up the panels part of this with, tons of good ideas that come out of this. If you're going to do what's your one top tip for people developing content within professional services firms, what would that be? Matt, I'll start with you.
Be prepared to pivot and pivot quickly.
Yeah, Amir?
I would say, get close to your partners, your fee earners. They're the ones that are close to the ground. They know what the client issues are. Spend a lot of time. We've got the gift of time right now. So use that gift of time.
Perfect. And Suzanne?
Yeah, audience. Reset your whole strategy, but start with your audience of what they want from you.
So Amir's point about linking it in with Salesforce and there's a client intelligence. My other thought is in maybe linking it with client feedback. Traditionally firms have thought about client feedback in one box and thought leadership in another. We're working with one client where we're saying actually use the client feedback to identify the challenges they're facing and then build thought leadership around that. The challenge, who's interested in it.
Yeah.
Perfect. We got to 9:30, so now's the kind of opportunity for the Q&A. So if anyone's got any questions, this time around we're going to do it kind of through audio. So everyone should be on mute, but if you've got a question, just unmute yourself and I'll put it out to the panel. So anyone got any questions?
I'll ask a question.
Yes. Who's that? Andy.
It's Andy. Yeah, Andy Knox. Hello, everyone. Very insightful panel. Thank you. Yeah, I'll ask a question about editorial process, because I've seen firsthand how painful that can be in kind of non-war times. You've got the partners that shout loudest, who therefore get the content out. You've got risk aversion. You've got no one wanting to actually state a point of view that someone might actually be interested in reading. So, in these times where we haven't got time for all of that stuff, my hope would be that that's forcing firms to adopt editorial processes where you say you've got one lead partner who's and Amir, someone like you, who's actually going to call what the agenda is, what the content agenda is, and they're going to do that not because they're trying to push a partisan line or their own business practice, but they recognize that that's what's of interest to people and that's what's valuable to clients. So do you see those processes streamlining in a way which perhaps, and I suspect it's, as ever, it's kind of better in accounting firms than law practices, but are you seeing things streamlining to a model which actually might be quite useful going?
Amir? Oh, rather than Matt, go on.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, one of the observations we've seen increasingly in law firms, and I think taking inspiration from the accountancy firms, is the role of a content editor, who's typically a national newspaper journalist that has some kind of not necessarily a deep understanding of professional services or the law or finance, but someone who is respected enough to stand up and hold partners' attention and say, this is what we should be focusing on. We see it in the big financial services. They've been doing that for quite some time, and it's beginning to filter down into legal practices.
And Suzanne, I was wondering about you, because I think you had an editorial panel, didn't you?
Yeah.
In your previous job, which sounds like a nice way of addressing this issue.
Yeah, I take that online, and I think often people, I think in big firms, when you have meetings around what you want to say and you're in that final throes, and lots of us been there, of your report, it's really fraught, that last meeting. Oh, I don't like this, and they're all speaking up and they want to be heard in the meeting. And what now? It's a great opportunity. You send the email, you send the final piece, you say you've got a day for your comments, and then you don't hear, and likely is you're going to have a faster, swifter process. That would be my prediction. I should make things easier.
Yeah, I think we'll all be grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andy, I think you're absolutely right. I think what I found is I've started to spend a lot more time researching what other our competitors are doing, spending a bit of time sort of scouring the market. Probably sort of 10% of my time is on that, and I've also had to acquire a skill set around copywriting. As marketers, you have to. And a lot of it is just gut feel. Sometimes it's if they're looking to you to sort of articulate that vision, some of it is gut feel, and some of it is obviously based on research. And I think there's a level of forgiveness. What we've seen is that we need to get this out. We need to get it out quickly. It doesn't really have to be perfect, and it's almost like there's an acceptance now, that what you might read isn't going to be the perfect, piece of insight. And if what this pandemic has brought is that, then I think it's not a bad thing.
And there, sometimes I work with organisations, and they're so scared of giving an opinion. They just recount, this is what the research said. Are people going to? Are firms happier to give an opinion on what they think is going to happen?
I think there's still, amount of there's still an amount of risk aversion, around giving, as long as it's qualified, as long as it's accurate, and especially now, when people are, trusting information, they just want, and if it's from a trusted source, it has to stack up still, as long as it's backed up by, a good, strong point of view or an articulated point of view that has, built in, that if you take this advice, or if you, there's going to be some optimistic, good that comes out of it. That's essentially what you're looking for. There's always going to be a sense of risk attached to any point of view.
Smashing. Cool. Time for another question. Anyone else got a question? I have a much easier question for all of our panel. This is Jonathan from Meridian West. Do any of our panel have any favourite examples of particularly engaging thought leadership or content you've seen since the recent crisis occurred? And let me caveat that question by saying that you weren't involved in. Thank you. Matt.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I mean, I wouldn't say I've seen anything that I would qualify as thought leadership, and I think, and that's partly because I think firms have been very quickly to recognise that actually thought leadership isn't what's needed at the moment. It's immediate support and advice. But I think I've subscribed to the Deloitte daily update, and I think it's actually a fantastic way of delivering that kind of insight and support that businesses are needing. But actually, we've seen even some of the smaller firms creating really good COVID hubs on their websites for clients that are offering practical guidance on how to use the government support rather than just echoing what government is saying.
Because that's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? Because, you know, you can't just parrot what the government are saying. No. And trying to predict the future is hard because no one knows. So it's quite difficult to find the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mentioned the McKinsey piece. I can pop the link into the chat, but I think it's very good because I think you have to go back to fundamentals, is where this is going to get their revenue and who's going to buy what going forward. And I think this is just so interesting time. And I spotted on your slide, actually, Ben, about the future of globalization. I think you had a question mark there. I don't think it's the end of it. I think it's a resetting of it. And there'll be new networks of trade, but they will be more limited. So I think looking at something around that and what those maps, future trade maps might look like could be interesting. But I think also the consumer behavior piece, which I'll pop in the chat.
That's
which I liked.
really interesting. Perfect. And Amir, have you, what about you?
Yeah, no, so I think IBM, you know, they've got their sort of think tank. You know, it's a really good source of information. I know that they've got a big digital conference, you know, virtual webinar, virtual event that they've got coming up. So I'd certainly recommend individuals going to that and just seeing how they are sort of planning that agenda. There's some really big hitters, you know, so it'll be interesting to see how that sort of pans out.
Brilliant. And just to wrap this up, just want to say thanks, guys. Really good discussion. Really enjoyed that. What we'll be doing as a sort of next step is we'll be taking this, doing some light edit on the video. We'll send around the list of the favourite campaigns. So that should be with you in the next couple of days. So if you want to share that with any of your colleagues. And then next week, we've got the next virtual breakfast, which is going to be hosted by my colleague, Alistair Beddoe. So I really hope that you can come along to that. So thanks very much.